Yes, I was asked also specifically what is you now doing with regard to the refugee crisis. I mean, if you followed the policy of the Commission, what they had already in May proposed with regard to a quota, a binding quota for refugees, which was refused. But that is not, because we can propose it here, and but it has to be accepted by at least a qualified majority. What I'm reading now, what was the internal ministers' meeting just now, today, ending apparently on the 8th of October. There might be a final result. But the point is, I would urge the ministers to check whether we have a qualified majority. In the treaty, we do not need unanimity on that, on such a quota. So 15 countries against 13, and from the 510, minus 35%. So around perhaps 180 million population represented would have to vote against binding quota, unless if they don't get it, if we have a majority at least of 15, and more than and less than 180 million who are against, we would have it. I would be happy to experience once that the ministers are courageous enough not to practice a unanimity that according to the treaties they do not need anymore. But that is only the one thing, the distribution. I think we have to definitely, and that has also been suggested by the Commission, to get our external borders, in inverted commas, fortified, meaning to upgrade Frontex and to, in very concrete terms now, to build on these hotspots on the external border, where we would then support those countries who accidentally are at the edge where the refugees are coming, so that we are solidaric in this regard, and that we do not try and think that is a solution that we individually protect our internal borders instead of collectively protecting our external borders. I think that is the lesson. I can accept for a while that the Germans say now we resume border controls with Austria, but we all know Austria is not our problem. It is the refugee crisis. And then we can go back step by step. What can we expect from different partners? And as we have a Turkish representative here, the week before last we were with the Security and Foreign Affairs parliamentarians from that is the successor organization of the WEU. We were in Luxembourg, national parliamentarians and European ones, and we decided with agreement of the Turkish colleagues who were there as observers to argue that we call on Turkey to apply its own legislation which forbids human trafficking, to apply it thoroughly against the traffickers in Turkey, and we also pledged for the EU to support Turkey financially more to be able to sustain the huge amount of refugees that they've taken. But the other way around says, and that we were friendly in the wording, and the Turks agreed also to that, but what actually happens in Turkey as we speak, you are, at least by not reacting officially as a government, you let it happen that more than 1,000 kilometers from the southeast of Turkey, people are trafficked to the Aegean coast and then let over the few kilometers to Greece. You are destabilizing a NATO partner in this way by not doing it, and they are all involved. In Mersin, in Bodrum, in Izmir, all the authorities either, the best is they ignore it, or perhaps they profit from it as well. And that is an outrageous situation. And I think that is a very concrete point where the EU should take it up in a summit with Turkey on migration now, not after the election. That is my pledge, that we take that up. You must not destabilize a NATO partner, and as an aspiring future member, one of your EU partners, Greece. Because that is where the whole wave starts, from the Greek islands to the mainland, to Macedonia, to Serbia, and then Hungary, Austria, Germany. And I think that is an unfriendly act against all of us, but I'm prepared to consider a lot of money also to help you, not to fight your own traffickers, but foremost to feed and host the refugees that are safe in your country. I would like to underline that, they are safe. So that is what the EU could also do and should do, take it up, external border, plus take it up with Turkey. That is half of the challenge. The other challenge is in the south with the Libya engagement that I already referred to.
So, Mr. Lotzer, you will have the final word, and you're not only the American on the panel, but you're also an expert on the Middle East, and it was quite interesting that I thought would have half the panel on the East and then the other part of the South, but there was actually unity on the panel that this is probably for the international community the more challenging area. So, having heard representatives from regional institutions and having witnessed obviously the disagreements that are with Russia and with Turkey within these institutions, but also between them, do you think that we will be successful in the international community will be successful in stabilizing the South, or what are the conditions you have in mind?
The truth, I wish I could answer that question. It is, of course, the right question. If we put it as the South as a whole, in some ways I'm skeptical. I think there are probably problems that we cannot solve. And if we accept that this is not just a matter of crisis management, but in fact a very long-term, maybe decades-long challenge, maybe longer than that, I would be very hesitant to say that we're going to stabilize all of those things, whether from the point of view of the United States or Europe or both. I would say, so we have to be realistic about that. I'd say on one of the things that we can think about directly, the refugee crisis, I would just underscore that the United States is a stakeholder in this. I mean, either because you feel that the United States is in some way implicated in the conditions that gave rise to this. Well, we all are in a sense, so let's accept that. And I think Americans do. But also because the United States has a stake, a really vigorous stake in Europe dealing with this effectively. Because the consequences, to go back to the title meeting, the consequences of not doing that are very injurious to American interests. I just mentioned two parts of that. One is it can be injurious to the European project, which we have a very big stake in, as I said. If you want to find supporters, you go to Washington now, and they would be very disappointed. But secondly, just in terms of European politics and society, the failure to deal with this over the longer term, I would judge, would support the rise of right-wing populist movements in particular, but let's say extremist politics generally. Not only will this be anti-European, it's also probably deeply anti-American. They're not Atlanticists. You've got electrodes of this in the room today. So we have a stake in it. On Turkey, it's a tough border, it's porous, it's not easy to control. I accept that. It's also true that a certain war economy develops around these kinds of crises, and that's sometimes very difficult to contain, and it does manifest itself in things like what you referred to, the difficulty of clamping down on people trafficking. I would say in terms of the American relationship with Turkey over what is happening in Syria and Iraq, something happened recently which is quite striking. The United States is, let me say it this way, Turkey has not allowed the United States to use Incirlik Air Base for offensive air operations since 1991. And in the last weeks, Turkey agreed to do that. Now, whether we can stay on the same page strategically, which makes this sustainable, when clearly the U.S. is focused on ISIS and Turkey is focused on other things, that's an open question to me. But it's not a small thing that happened. And in any case, we're not. Assad now controls maybe 10% of the country, 10-15%. I don't know what the figure is. He's not going to win. Whatever you're going to get is not going to be a return to the status quo ante. Whether the Russians put it in place or we try to put it in place, it's just not going to happen. So I don't think in discussing strategy towards Syria, the option of sort of rolling back the clock and having Assad control the country again, I simply don't think that's an option. On Russia and dialogue, well, I would simply say this. There's no question that the beginning of the problem here, in my view, anyway, we may disagree, was the violation in a very dramatic way of a very well-established norm in Europe about the security of borders and international law. And this has deeply affected American opinion, it's deeply affected European opinion. we may never agree on this. But having said that, is it possible to have a